I'm Matt.
I'm Kerry.
We are the Stagmer brothers, a Baltimore knife and sword. We're going to be building some of your favorite weapons, and some weapons that you've never seen before.
This is Man-at-Arms, Reforged.
Ever since the release of Bloodborne, you guys have been crying for us to make one of those weapons, and every one of them transforms in some tricky way. We chose to do the massive cleaver that's on the cover art. It's got a lot of engineering, some big heavy forging. It's gonna be awesome, so let's get right to it.
For the cleaver build, we're going to be using a section of railroad track. We actually already cut the cap off the top of this track and used it for the berserk sword. Now we will be cutting the foot off the bottom, and that will become the cleaver. Sam now takes this large section of track to the power hammer. He'll be forging that web down, forcing it wider. We need to gain about 50% additional width to this before we continue with cutting in the edges.
Now Ilya is going to be assisting Sam. What they're going to do is they're going to move to the power hammer and they're going to draw out that striking point on that front edge. Now that they got that point drawn out, they move to the horn of our large anvil to bend that point over and give it the curve that it needs.
So we have the Bloodborne cleaver profiled. I did a little bit of rough beveling down at the tip, and then there was some natural beveling left from pushing that web into the center. Just like Matt said, if we can forge it, he can grind it, and I forged it.
Using an OXY-PROPANE torch, Sam cuts in slices for the teeth on this cleaver. He then takes a chisel, bends them out, and hammers them to form.
Alright, now that the forging is done on this massive cleaver blade, Sam flattened it down and created a natural bevel. That really is going to save me a lot of time in the grinding. I just have to go in on this side and match this bevel. I'm also going to do a slight bit of profiling up here on this top hook on the 2-inch wheel before I go to the edging. It's going to be a big, massive, devastating weapon in the demos.
Looking closer at some of the pictures, we decided that we wanted to alter the teeth. Sam now heats them up and drives them back the other direction.
Because the Bloodborne cleaver is so heavy and the shape is pretty tricky, I'm using black iron pipe for the handle. I'm going to heat it up in the forge and bend it freehand over the horn of the anvil using a wooden mallet.
To make nice smooth transitions, Sam heats the pipe up, bends it, and then quenches it so that it'll retain a little bit more of its form.
The pivot point is the mechanism that allows this weapon to lock open and lock closed. First, we have to move to the plasma cutter and get those parts roughed out. Now that we have our parts cut, it's time to move to the sanders and clean them up. We have to make sure the surfaces are nice and clean or it won't open smoothly.
So Kerry cut all the parts on the plasma for Bloodborne's pivot. I cleaned them up on the 80 grit, and now I'll show you how they work. The main pivot disc goes here. There's 2 cheek pieces that go on either side. And then this is the catch mechanism, and it'll be mounted to the ears with an axle. I know this looks blobby, but we left that meat there because it'll get forged out into the decorative part of the handle.
Alright, last night Sam and Kerry got rid of a lot of this excess on the end of our blade here. Fit it pretty much where we want to go with the scoop here. Now I'm just going to move to the smaller wheel and clean these 2 scoops up, and then John's going to be able to weld our disc onto the blade.
As you've seen the pivot parts for Bloodborne,
We cut them separately instead of trying to make them directly out of the main piece. We know that that's weldable prior to heat treating, so it's not really going to be a problem. It's got to be flat so that the piece pivots smoothly. So I'm going to go in here, put a couple of tacks on one side, flip it over, burn that weld in solid, flip it back over, do the opposite side. We'll do some grinding, and then afterwards we'll come in with a torch and get it all looking like it's all forged to shape. But it'll be very strong at that point.
With our disc now attached with a heavy bead of weld, I move to the sander to start blending that off. I also have to define a lot more shape in the teeth on the back side of the blade. So I use the sander and really hog some metal off. I'll refine that shape later with a disc sander, but for now, we just gotta get that shape roughed in. We brought in Bill. He's gonna use an angle grinder and really define a lot of the shape on these teeth.
Okay, Kerry fabricated the hinge assembly for the Bloodborne axe. I'm going to go ahead and weld it together.
Now that I've cut the handle to length, I have John weld the handle onto the pivot. Sam now wraps the welded area with a piece of rod that's had the back sanded off. That will allow it to sit much tighter to the pipe handle. Sam uses a slightly larger piece of pipe and then a flat plate to create a butt cap for this handle. Using a large furnace that we typically use for armor, they bring this piece up to critical temperature, about 1500 degrees, and then quench the edge into oil. Sam now wire wheels the cleaver. This will get us very close to our finish for this entire piece.
I'm gonna use the weed burner to run the temper colors on the Bloodborne cleaver.
Ilya now uses a solid carbide burr on the surface to cut in the runes on this piece. He has to use something extremely hard because the blade has already been hardened.
If someone has ever taken a trip through old Victorian asylums and tuberculosis clinics, they'll see scratchings on the walls written down by demented, tormented people. Now, I'm using that as my inspiration for the carving on the runes of the blade.
Sam now forges a custom spring. This will be the return spring on the locking mechanism.
Parts rough fit. I hardened and tempered the spring to a nice peacock blue. The location of my first scribe slot will be right here. Then I'm going to move it to the open position. And that's the location of my second scribe slot.
The builds that have a lot of tricky moving parts are always the most complex to do. They take a lot of time and a whole lot of thought. The guys really stepped up big time, and I'm super proud to say that we made the first weapon on Man-at-Arms from Bloodborne.
Click here to subscribe, or click here to watch more episodes. Thanks for watching Man-at-Arms Reforged. We need to know what you want the guys to build, so tell us in the comments below what weapons you want to see next.